Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather tonight. Thank you for joining us once again. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information, whether it's the 22nd of January or June. No matter the time of the year, the Alaska Weather Information Line is open for you at 1-800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska, and you can still check our Facebook and Twitter feeds anytime. Just go to facebook.com and in the search bar type in NWS Alaska, or if you see a feed pop up on your phone there, just click like, and we'd love your follow there, NWS Alaska. And of course on Twitter, NWS Alaska, NWS Anchorage, NWS Juneau, and NWS Fairbanks, of course, all ready to serve you there. As always, if you have weather questions, we invite your questions, comments, and concerns at david.snider@noaa.gov. That's the easiest way to find me online. And once you do, send me your weather picture of where you are in your part of Alaska. We'd love to see how things look for your winter time there. And as we slowly turn the page toward late winter, I guess. Wouldn't dare say spring just yet. As we look at southeast, we've got a little bit of yellow on the map there tonight, and that means a dense fog advisory is posted for the region. That's going to continue until about 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, we think. Areas of dense fog may slow you down a little bit, whether it's aircraft or marine travel, but just take it easy out there. Looks like we've got a little chunk of stable air, but over the next couple days we're going to start moving a little more wind through the region, so probably not very long-lived as far as the rest of the week's weather goes. A look up north shows that most of the higher terrain from Healy down to the Alaska Range, eastward toward the eastern Alaska Range passes in the Deltana and Tanana Flats region, generally dealing with some gusty winds out of the south. As we go through the rest of tonight, south winds 50 to 60 mile an hour gusts will be more likely. We're not talking about sustained winds, but gusts there could interrupt your travel, especially if you're going through in maybe a large truck or Winnebago or something like that. You're probably going to run into a little bit of hold the steering wheel a little bit harder kind of weather there for at least a few more minutes. So plan for some gusts. It should improve as we go through the daytime tomorrow. And to look a little bit further north, everything from Tanana to Bettles and then up to the northwest coast, the Selawik Valley, Bering Strait, and the lower Yukon Valley, including areas out across the Yukon Delta, are looking at winter weather advisories, and that is a reduction in visibility, maybe some light snow or both. A little bit of wind will do that, and it looks like most areas will be dealing with some of that through the rest of the evening hours tonight, 6, 9 o'clock, and then continuing on through tomorrow morning in some cases. So weather is generally improving, but it looks like for now many locations will be dealing with at least a little bit of wind and probably a little more snow and wind out across some of the lower terrain. Let's take a look at the satellite picture, and our really big weather player is seen out here just east of Adak, and you can see that really broad spinning low as that moves slowly, lurks across the southern Bering Sea. As part of the overall weather picture, it's working with high pressure up here around Great Slave Lake, and that very deep, broad area of cold is pushing air across the continent, out of Alaska, into the ocean, and into this low pressure system. So as long as we have those two systems working, the whole weather picture is going to continue as we see it today. Now, that broad southerly flow is sweeping several waves of warm and wet air up, especially through the west coast and the Alaska Peninsula. It's having a little more trouble moving that into southeast. Remember, we've got this stable round of air sitting right across southeast, and because of that, we've got some fog across the area. With that southerly flow working up, though, we're going to see temperatures come up just a little bit more across west and southwestern Alaska, and we'll probably slow down the advance of the ice edge out across the central and northern Bering Sea. As of last check, and as you'll see here in just a little while, that ice edge is it is forming right around St. Matthew, but the main ice edge is probably somewhere on the order of about 10 to maybe 20 nautical miles northeast of St. Matthew before you get into the really big stuff, but the strips are a lot closer than that. And this flow is promoting that general motion out and away from the ice edge and further south towards St. Matthew. So the ice is coming, but with this southerly flow working up the west coast, we're going to slow that down probably just a little bit for another day or so. As you look at the loop one more time, notice that most of those clouds really aren't making their way too much further north of Fairbanks. So there has been some pretty cold weather there. High pressure working its magic into the upper Yukon Valley, letting temperatures into the anywhere from 15 to about 20, 25 below it looks like. We've got one front sitting here across the northern Gulf Coast, stretching all the way out into the low at 964 millibars and several other waves just south of that. This is the main player here. This is what's separating that warmer air from that colder, drier air across the continent. As we get into tonight, you'll notice that this organizes a little bit more on that western side, around 966 millibars for the main low, and 973 just north of the Alaska Peninsula. And as this front is creeping its way toward the Kenai Peninsula, we're going to start to see more snowflakes, maybe some light snow around south central, but a much better chance of you seeing a little bit more on the Prince William Sound and the Seward side than anywhere else. Kodiak Island's going to see some periods of moderate to occasionally heavy rain. Central and southern parts of southeast may see some light rain as well, but we're not expecting any major precipitation around northern parts of southeast. Your fog will probably be a sign that things are going to be status quo for you as we go through tonight and into tomorrow morning. The crossed arrows mean blowing snow is possible, and we already know there's going to be wind around the Alaska Range and points west. Look for areas of light snow across the west coast combined with some wind. A winter weather advisory for you will stand through tonight and tomorrow. North of that 966 millibar low, and as it moves westward, we expect to see some rain and snow in that region, so places across the western chain or ships at sea may run into a little bit of rain and snow in that area. Out across the west coast, don't be surprised to run into some light snow as we go through the rest of your Wednesday. High pressure is backing down from its higher level, more stable level. It's still cold, but as it moves a little bit closer to Old Crow and Arctic Village, you'll notice that generally that east to westerly flow across the west coast will be maintained, and around the Bering Strait a better chance for some of that blowing snow to continue as well. Snow showers, light snow across southwest. It still looks like fairly mild conditions there across the northern Gulf Coast. That could include rain from Juneau up toward Yakutat, around Prince William Sound, and then into the Kenai Peninsula gradually. I wouldn't be surprised to see some cold spots that might be dealing with rainfall, which could mean some light freezing rain as we go. Keep an eye on that. As we get into Thursday, light rainfall across the north and eastern Gulf Coast. Looks like slightly drier weather for the Cook Inlet region as you get into the Alaska Range. That's snow. The west and southwest still dealing with rain and snow there. A little bit better chance for some rain around the coast. And then some snow and blowing snow for parts of the Bering Strait, with high pressure shifting back to the Canadian maritime areas there, 1,016 millibars, areas of snow and some light flurries for the north coast. With low pressure, another wave working its way into the west coast, and notice how tight this pressure gradient is. We'll keep watch on that as we get into Thursday and Friday and see if there's any advancement of the wind for issues around the northern Gulf Coast or even for the east there as that continues to bring warmer weather northward there. In the meantime, a little bit of a ridge breaking up some of the clouds and low pressure sitting out around Kiska as we get into the end of the week. Let's take a look at your temperatures as we get into your Wednesday morning. Cold spot honors look like they'll be going to Fort Yukon and parts of maybe Eagle, anywhere from 15 to 30 below, about 30 below for the North Slope as well. North and Sound temperatures from about 11 above around Tin City to Nome to about 20 or so just south of Unalakleet and into Amonuk, 23 around Nunivak Island, 20s and 30s for most of the Alaska Peninsula and the chain, south central in the 20s to about 34 around Homer, and southeast back in the upper 20s and mid-30s there if you're looking at Sitka. High temperatures for the afternoon, 10 below in Fort Yukon, anywhere from 13 to 15 below for Atkasuk up toward Utqiagvik, 10 below for Kaktovik, 27 in Nome, 14 for Shishmaref. Look at, it looks like Dillingham, 42, about the same there for King Salmon, 41 in Kodiak, and upper 30s to mid-40s for a large part of southeast, fairly mild there, and 35 in St. Paul with Adak at 34, Dutch Harbor in Unalaska close to 40 degrees. Our Thursday morning, look for lows to warm up just a little bit more out there in the west. Temps coming up overnight to the mid-30s. South and western temperatures probably in the 20s and 30s around Bristol Bay toward the YK Delta, 22 for Unalakleet, 15 in Kotzebue, 21 below for Utqiagvik, about 19 below for Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. Cold night there. It looks like 17 below for Fort Yukon. And south central, you're looking at overnight lows that are right around that freezing point. Remember, we were going to keep an eye out for that freezing rain. This would be a good opportunity for that to happen temperature-wise. And 30s and 40s for a large part of southeast. As we get into Thursday afternoon, we're back in the mid to upper 40s for many parts of central and southern parts of southeast. Prince William Sound also pushing that 40-degree mark fairly easily. The Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet into the mid to upper 30s, 41 degrees around Kodiak, 2 below at Fort Yukon, and 8 below for Utqiagvik. West and southwest temperatures back in the mid to upper 30s, many in Bristol Bay above freezing.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to aviation weather now. IFR will be fairly widespread across the west coast, the YK Delta into Bristol Bay and generally north of the Pribilofs up towards St. Matthew and along the ice edge itself. and across the windward side of the Alaska Peninsula in this case, and south and western sections of Kodiak Island. For the eastern end of the Gulf, we'll see generally VFR conditions to start your Wednesday morning, but look for IFR across some of the Misty Fjords region and MVFR across Clarence Strait and out into the outer coast itself. Around Prince William Sound, an IFR starts expected, and across some parts of the Alaska range in the west. Notice how that increases in coverage as we go into your Wednesday afternoon. Continues tracking northward as well. Remember, that front, as that lifts northward, will be pushing that low visibility and low ceiling further and further north into the Bering Strait. St. Lawrence Island, St. Matthew Island included. And we're also going to see that IFR conditions increasing across the central and northern parts of southeast into the Chilkoot and White Pass region, as well as areas across the northern Gulf Coast. Do look for some improvement around Kodiak Island and point southward. West of that, all the way toward St. Paul and St. George, we do expect to see fairly widespread MVFR. North of the Alaska Range, a little more hit and miss, especially along the Yukon River and northward toward the North Slope. For your Thursday morning, look for IFR conditions around the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, all the way into Kotzebue Sound, Norton Sound, and into Cape Newenham, Eatoll Strait, out to St. Matthew. MVFR should be fairly widespread across the Bering and also around south central and north and south of the Alaska Range. To the east and the eastern Gulf, look for IFR widespread across all of southeastern Alaska and into the western sections of Prince William Sound. For Thursday afternoon, a little bit of improvement around the north and eastern Gulf Coast. You'll still see IFR fairly widespread across southeast. Hit and miss IFR now across south central, more MVFR than anything else. Across the west coast, Kotzebue Sound, Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula, and into the Brooks Range, and over that into the North Slope to about, let's say, Point Lay, not quite to Wainwright, Utqiagvik, and certainly looks like IFR conditions for Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. Here's your pass conditions, and we do expect to see VFR moving over toward MVFR conditions for Anaktuvik Pass and Adigan Pass as we go through your daytime tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass probably going to hold at IFR really for most of the day after that quick transition in the morning. Rainy Pass looks to be MVFR through most of your Wednesday. Windy Pass also expected to be marginal most of the day, as is Isabel Pass and Mentasda Pass throughout your Wednesday afternoon. Tenedo Pass looking to be marginal most of the day. We'll see IFR conditions starting to creep in a little bit more the further south you go into Portage Pass, of course, and then Chilkoot and White Pass. A really quick flip into from VFR to IFR conditions for your Wednesday. Here's your freezing levels, and you'll notice that the warm air aloft is not present around the Bering Sea. The surface freezing lines being pushed further and further northward, but the bulk of the warmth air is really over the Gulf of Alaska right now. Levels there range from about 2,000 feet around the capital city, south to about 4,000 feet over the Dixon entrance, and you can see some of that warmer air is also stretching up to about Kodiak Island and Sand Point there. Everything north of that, of course, is below freezing. Now, as far as icing potential goes, the levels are pushing up there. There is some warmer air aloft that is allowing that moisture to kind of to be generally limited. You've got drier air, I should say. Drier air is in place at the lower level, so until you reach about 6,000 to 7,000 feet, you're not really running into any significant icing potential. So we'll call it isolated moderate around the west coast, and then over to south central. Those levels fall off a little bit more as more of that low-level moisture starts to creep into your weather picture, so from about 4,000 to 8,000 feet here from east to west. And then as that colder and wetter air is moving into the central and western chain, those icing levels drop to about 3,000 feet for the central and western parts of the Aleutians. Here's the big weather picture now. The fast-moving river of air, that jet stream just screaming across the North Pacific there, 155 to 180 knots. A ridge of high pressure is pushing that southerly flow into Alaska, about 55 to 60 knots, and you can see that west and northwesterly flow picking back up as it moves into the lower 48 states and western Canada. At 9,000 feet, that broad southerly flow is coming into south central, about 35 to 50 knots. The ridge blowing in wind to southeast, around 30 to 40 knots. For the North Slope, you're looking at about 10 to 20 knots. Some of those stronger winds there around Kaktovik, and low pressure helping to guide it all with a west and southwesterly flow over the central and eastern chain. A little bit more complex picture here if you add in all the low pressure systems at 3,000 feet, but really the big picture is the same. Southerly winds a little bit stronger here over the Gulf up to 60 knots, south and westerlies coming into southeast around 20 knots, and a general southerly flow over the North Slope about 15 to 20, and offshore winds for most of the west coast. Bering Strait winds a little bit stronger, around 45 knots there. And that's where we find most of the turbulence, really below 5,000 feet for the northern Gulf Coast, the west coast, all the way down toward the Alaska Peninsula. Watch for considerable moderate to be widespread.
On March 11, 2011, a powerful tsunami hit Japan, destroying cities and villages. As the water receded back into the ocean, it pulled what remained of buildings, cars, boats, and homes along with it. Scrap metals, plastics, and objects of all shapes and sizes either sank near the shore or floated away. In the days that followed, large masses of floating debris could easily be seen by satellite imagery and aerial photos. In the wake of this disaster, NOAA is assessing the potential impact that the debris may have on U.S. shores. So, where will this debris go, and when will it get there? To help answer those questions, scientists are using computer models to estimate the debris' path, using its starting location in the tsunami zone and historical weather and ocean conditions. The findings are that some debris could pass near or wash ashore in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands as early as this winter. Debris may also approach the west coast of the United States in 2013 and potentially circle back to the main Hawaiian Islands in 2014. But scientists caution that there are limitations to what computer models can tell us, now that the debris has moved out of satellite view. And with currents and winds in the Pacific constantly changing, there is no guarantee that the debris will stay on the predicted path. Items will sink along the way, or break up and disperse in many directions. Despite these unknowns, NOAA and its partners are collecting data, assessing possible impacts, and making preparations in case debris does wash ashore. The 2011 tsunami in Japan reminds us that the devastation that happens on land can also become a marine debris issue at sea.
Imagine all of this underwater. In a major tsunami, it could happen. In this part of Washington state, it's happened before, hundreds of years ago. Sometime in the future, it will likely happen again. But we can be ready. If a tsunami strikes, this school will provide a place for people to ride it out above the waves.
We're in Westport, Washington, and right behind me is the very first tsunami vertical evacuation center in the United States.
We will now begin the tsunami evacuation.
This is an emergency. Please walk to the nearest exit.
Let's go.
Go to the stair tower and proceed up the stairs.
Tsunamis are a potential hazard for low-lying coastal areas. That's why many coastal communities have plans in place to get people to safety, high ground or inland, where they can be beyond the reach of a tsunami. Often there are signs showing where to go and where to gather. Most tsunamis are caused by underwater earthquakes along subduction zones, where two of Earth's plates collide and one is forced under the other. Westport and other Pacific Northwest coastal communities are especially at risk because one of these zones lies just offshore. It's called the Cascadia Subduction Zone. An earthquake here caused a tsunami in 1700 that flooded shores as far away as Japan. Experts say it's just a matter of time before it happens again. Since the subduction zone is so close, a tsunami like the one in 1700 could strike before people in some low-lying areas could get to high ground or inland. And Westport doesn't have a lot of high ground or easy routes inland.
If we get an earthquake or a tsunami, we're going to get a lot of water in the area really quickly, and we needed a place to go. So our community built this brand new school, and above our gym and cafeteria, we have a roof. And so the idea is that we'll get all of our students up, and anybody from the community who needs to get up, they can get up there as well.
Ocosta Elementary School might seem like a normal school, but look more closely. It's engineered to withstand monster waves. Tsunami vertical evacuation shelters must be able to resist the powerful forces that a tsunami brings. Hydrodynamic, buoyant, hydrostatic, and debris impact forces and strong currents. They're also designed to help people get to safety quickly.
There are 4 big staircases on each corner of the building, and each one of those staircases is 8 feet wide, and we can get the whole school evacuated in about 4.5 minutes.
Everybody should be at a 0.
On the roof of the building, there is water and food and buckets and shelters and tarps and blankets and different things so that we can be up there for 2, 3, maybe 4 days while we wait for rescue.
You can go to the top and you know you'll be safe. It feels really nice to have a special building because you feel protected.
This community decided that a tsunami evacuation center was important because they didn't have anywhere to go, and they decided to use their money to build the building. The additional cost is anywhere between 10 and 20% of the actual building cost itself, and that's really a sound investment for a lot of protection. You may be there a while, but you're safe and you're secure, and that's the most important thing.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And on to your marine weather now. The ice edge will continue to build west and south with the general offshore flow moving out of Alaska and toward the central and northern Bering Sea. High pressure up across Canada is feeding in this very cold and dry air. So while we are getting a temporary shift into more of a southerly flow that's working up the west coast, those temps are going to moderate downward once again, and we'll be back to growing a little more ice. But as you can see, here's St. Matthew. And if we were to zoom in even more on this, you'll probably see a little bit of the ice that's already growing around St. Matthew. Marginal areas of strips a little bit further north and east. That's probably about 5, 10, maybe 15 nautical miles north and east of St. Matthew. The overall more 80% concentration is probably about 20 to 25 nautical miles north and east. But strips are moving fairly close to St. Matthew right now. So if you're in the vicinity, know somebody that is. Of course, that is getting a lot closer than it has been in the last week or so. The overall ice pack edge probably will continue to grow, but maybe slow down just a little bit the next day or so as we are getting that southerly wind in. Here's a look at southeast, and south and easterly winds will be working through the inside passage as we get into Wednesday. 10 to 15 knots there, 2 to 3 foot seas, northerlies in the Lynn Canal, and again, dense fog advisory around the Juneau area as we get into tomorrow morning. South and southeasterly winds up the outer coast, 25 to 30 knots there, stronger around Prince William Sound if you're headed that way, 12 to 13 foot seas on the outer coast. Those pick up a little bit more as that front is swinging through. Look at the seas coming up to 16 feet in some cases outside of Cross Sound and down around Port Alexander. 30-knot winds from the south and east there. On the inside, 15 to 25 with 3 foot seas in the north and central areas. Further south, we're looking at about 8 foot seas on Thursday. For South Central, strongest winds will be outside of Prince William Sound, inside 35 knots and 9 foot seas, 14 foot seas on the outside, 16 to 19 foot seas across the north and western Gulf, down Cook Inlet, 25 to 30 knots generally over the ice until you get over past Kenai, and then 30 to 45 knots as you head down into the southern parts of Cook Inlet west of the Barrens, 45 knots and 22 foot seas there. Those come down remarkably as we get into Thursday. Still looking at about 30 to 35 in the northern Gulf, 30-knot winds from the east in Prince William Sound at 6 foot seas there. Seas coming down a little bit across the Cook Inlet region, but still around 20 to 25-knot winds and 7 to 8 foot seas for Thursday. For Bristol Bay, 30 knots with a southeast wind, 7 foot seas there, 8 foot seas down the coast as you look around Kodiak Island. 30 to 35 knot winds there, 20 to about 22 foot seas, 12 foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait. Easterly winds at 30 there, down to 20 on Thursday with a southeast flow. 6 foot seas with 14 to 16 foot seas, I should say, south of AKwx, and then as high as 19 feet south of Sandpoint and westward False Pass. In the Bering, you're looking at about 6 to 7 foot seas with 25 to 30 knot winds from the east and southeast on Thursday. For the Aleutians, expect west and southwesterly winds, the strongest of which will be out here around Kiska to Shemya and Attu. You're looking at low pressure that's kind of hovering in that area, so it's going to be driving a little bit of a stronger flow. You can see the wraparound winds right about here. The central and eastern southerly flow, the central and eastern chain will be in southerly flow, 15 to 20 knots, looking about 14-foot seas south of Unalaska and Nikolsky, 8 to 10-foot seas on the north side. As we get into Thursday, you can see the higher winds and seas moving just south of Kiska to Adak to Atka, anywhere from 6 to 12-foot seas there in the east to about 14 to 19-foot seas there in the west. And once again, low pressure parked right about here. You can see that wind shift taking place between Shemya and Adak there, 25 to 35 knot winds, with other regions looking about more of a west and southwesterly flow, about 15 to 25. For the west coast, over the ice for the most part, east and northeasterly winds here, 20 to 30 knots. A little bit of a southwesterly flow coming into the Kuskokwim Delta, but generally speaking, an east and northeasterly flow, 20 to 25, 9 to 13-foot seas there on Wednesday, and then 6 to 8-foot seas there on Thursday. It's still looking at that generally offshore wind, about 15 to 30 knots for your Thursday afternoon. Up north, it's an east and northeasterly flow for all areas, 15 to 20 in the Beaufort and 15 to 25 the Chukchi Sea, 30 knots around the Bering Strait communities. As we get into Thursday, 10 to 20 knot winds there again from the north and the east. The Chukchi coast looking at about 20 to 25. Again, all over the ice for your Thursday. Recapping tonight's weather, southerly winds are going to dominate our weather picture for the next couple days. Generally over the higher terrain, we're going to be looking at wind advisories, especially through your mountain passes there. You could see some gusts around 50 to 60 miles per hour. For the west coast community, snow and some blowing snow may reduce visibilities as we go through tonight. Some of that will gradually improve toward tomorrow morning, so I do expect to see winter weather advisories for many west coast communities as we go into the nighttime hours and tomorrow. For Juneau, we'll start out with some fog, and that should gradually improve throughout the day as well. We've got a southerly wind working into your region with a front to stir things up. Most notably, it looks like that front will park along the outer coast as we get into Thursday with rain for your region for Thursday afternoon.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.